These chairs scare me. Like every time I sit down, I feel like they're gonna fly out behind me, so I always hold.
I think they're comfortable. I like these chairs.
Sorry, I don't usually bring that, but I had it with me because I didn't come to my office. Hi, how was your meeting?
You didn't hurt yourself again, did you?
Pickleball. One too many pickleball games. Then I walked across the Brooklyn Bridge and got halfway. My knee decided to go out. So I had to hobble to the other side. I got nothing else I could do. I couldn't go back. So I'm stuck. There's no way.
What do you think about hiring
Yes. Sheesh.
more people for code enforcement?
But I love the sport.
Don't answer that. What's he directing you to do?
I think that,
He's getting awful bossy over
I think we're
there.
getting behind.
Russ, telling everybody what we're gonna do.
Well,
I think we're having more challenges than we used
you
to.
know, you think somebody that doesn't give a rip about
We have a new planning person, Josh.
Shirley's face here tonight?
No, I want to hire a big gorilla with a baseball bat. We have a safety officer? Oh, really? Can we get him in code enforcement? I think
Almost. Yeah.
Have you heard any more about the trip? Japanese people coming?
No, there's a meeting Thursday night. I have 3 meetings Thursday after I get
In a row, or you can add?
in a row. And then I wanted to be at
Oh,
Jennifer's.
that's right. I was gonna say Thursday I have something going. That's
Yeah,
what it is.
Jennifer's.
Tony has a dinner date that night, so he's like, oh, that's perfect. You can go have your dinner, and one of his best friends from high school recently passed away. His mother's coming to town, and she wanted to have dinner with him.
Oh,
Visit with him. I was like, that's so very nice.
Yeah.
She told him on the phone yesterday, I'm bringing some pictures for you.
oh, that's
It's
neat.
really gonna be special.
Yeah,
He's
that's-
really looking forward to it.
Yeah, that's neat.
I said, you should take her somewhere nice and just enjoy the visit.
So what's the deal out at the old Whimsicker? Who's gone in there?
The people that have Fun Country.
Oh, that's right, Fun Country. That's right. Yeah, yes.
Yeah. And
Now
so
I
they're
remember.
gonna be catering and events. And I
But
guess
not to have it,
they're not gonna have a restaurant, but I.
Got one of your signs out at the shop, I'll put it up.
Bar type thing at some point, and I don't know if they've done it.
okay.
Wow.
That was a good time.
Good. Did you leave it all?
How'd you do Sunday?
Sunday, well, Saturday, neither one of us did very good, but Sunday I ended up third out of about 40. Didn't get home till 8 o'clock.
Just make some money?
Yeah, I got, there's a payout, but I don't know how much it is, because we just loaded up and left as soon as I went out. Had to leave my car there, loaded Chris's 58 on the trailer, because the new fancy-ass electric fuel pump in the trunk for the fuel injection quit working.
From another meeting.
I need to apologize publicly to
Your fuel injection?
On Chris's 58, that 58 Chevy, I talked her into putting an electronic fuel injection on it.
That in a
This
different
is your
venue.
ex?
Yeah. She drove it all the way up from Denio and shut it off at drag strip, and
Hey,
then it wouldn't
Steve,
start.
Didn't do my search.
do you want, are you gonna do this? It's at the, are you gonna do it, Tim?
Are you going to league? I
Hey.
thought you weren't going to.
No, I can't.
Yeah, I'm going. We're going.
Yeah.
Are we gonna get this meeting started?
And I even
Chop, chop. Hey, we're supposed to start at 5:30. Slam the hamburger.
Oh.
It's working.
I'll call the meeting to order. First order is, you're not gonna take, the,
You should
Roll call?
note who's absent.
doesn't say roll call, so.
For the record.
This is a city council work session, and we do have one missing council member, Darcy Long Curtis. The city attorney is on vacation, so everybody else is present. And the first item on the work session is the building code services. We have your report. You want us just to throw questions at you? You want to go over it?
Council's discretion.
Pardon me?
But be easy on him, because he just came from a meeting too. I've got my stuff all over the countryside today.
Well, yeah, building codes is the first
Yeah,
part on it.
we're still waiting for Dave.
Dave,
Dave Anderson for the street.
oh,
Would you like to start with questions and see where it goes?
Yeah. Anybody have questions? I got some questions. Want me to start? Looking at comparative programs, the city of Hood River, is analyzing whether they want to change theirs. I thought the state law was changing, that might be interfering with this ability to have, contractual services. Is that correct? You know about that?
I believe I know some of the details, Mayor. That there had been I guess there was some action by the legislature, then bill was put on hold, and then Building Codes Division decided to move forward with requiring the local jurisdictions who have a building official to be a public employee and not a contract. And I believe they pulled back from that rule for the time being.
No, okay. You know of nothing in the coming legislature that's being proposed that way?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Okay, and the Commodore Hotel, you did an analysis of the fourth floor, but knowing that the main floor is either going to be available or available now, did you take a look at that?
Yes, we did. There is one current vacant space on the 3rd Street side. It's rather rough, and so there's considerable tenant improvements would be required.
Where the real estate company was?
It's on the far west, or far east side of the building.
Okay. Well, you know, that real estate company's not gonna be there. They're moving. So that potentially is available
Potentially.
space.
So right now, there is a space available. It is on the 1st floor. It's rather narrow and deep. It goes all the way through. So it does have street-level frontage. There are windows. There's a room to construct a public counter and a lobby area at the beginning, and then you could build out the rest of it. Although, it would provide street side access for the public and staff, et cetera. It's my understanding that that when the services were in the Commodore, they were on the 4th floor, and so those offices are built out. There need to be some minor improvements made.
I'm not sure how old that elevator is. People going up. and
Well, that's
down.
all been upgraded.
yeah,
It's very nice.
You think so?
yeah.
Okay, all right. In looking at other planned space, the Public Works alternative space, did you happen to look at the possibility of not only, if you did this, putting the building permit program out there, but planning?
Didn't look at moving planning out there. It's approximately 2,000 square feet up at the 2nd floor space. I mentioned in the report, the planning office now occupies about 1,350, and that includes that small conference room. So all told, if we're looking at 800 plus for building, then another 12 for planning, it could work. They do have a large ground floor lobby area or public area. There is a small public counter now for Public Works. There could be an opportunity to remodel that 1st floor area to add a 2nd public counter. That could be for building and planning.
I just like the idea of having building and, building permits in the same, or planning and building permits in the same place.
There is a definite advantage to that,
But
yes.
in order to have it in the space available is upstairs, as I understand it, and there's no elevator to the upstairs, so it can't be used for anything but storage at this time.
We would have to install an elevator, that is true,
Out at city,
Public Works.
to make it public accessible.
okay, and then, the recommendation says apply to the state, board to assume a local building services program, but it doesn't say including Wasco County. Would that be your recommendation or not?
Well, the recommendation at this time is just, for one, for the council to have this discussion, and then if there is an interest on the part of the council to assume this local program, then with the council's direction would be then to contact the state and begin that process. There are no deadlines attached to the process. It's fairly structured. And one of the attachments to the report includes everything that you essentially have to be looking at. As far as the question on whether it be a city.
Excuse me, I thought there was a deadline of December 31st that a decision had to be made.
Well, if the city and/or Wasco County were to contact the State Building Codes Division at this time, then they would set aside that deadline, and we would continue then to work with the state and the county perhaps to move forward to this local building assumption program, local program assumption.
So you didn't intend to say you were recommending just the city do the city's building permit?
That's correct. That was
Well,
in the
that's
various
already
staffing alternatives we presented.
Well, I understand that.
I shared my thoughts about this earlier with some of staff and council, and I read this memorandum from Tyler about the building codes program, and, I don't mean this to sound negative, but Tyler's a mercenary, and that's his job. He's supposed to find money and save money for the county. And in his conclusion and recommendation, it says building codes is not a mandated or core function of the county service portfolio. Given this program would incur significant staff increases, administration, and facility costs to implement, it does not appear to be the right move at this time, given that we are projecting future increases in expenses that will outpace increases in revenue. You could put the city in place of the county, and I can't imagine why we could do it cheaper or better. Mr. Kramer, I guess it's your job.
We intended to have Mr. Kramer say things.
Councilor Brown, I want to come to Tyler Stone's defense. Tyler Stone is there at the mercy of the three of us to find the best use for services in the county. And to the other piece of that is that Wasco County makes up approximately 10% of all the permits issued. And so that's the other side of that coin where the city is, as you read in your memorandum there as well, produced by Director Harris, that most of the permits, 82% are incurred here within the city limits.
But because of that, does that make it, is that gonna make it a better deal? I mean, we're still gonna incur the same expenses and everything else, and we're not mandated to furnish those services. The state of Oregon is mandated to do it, and in my opinion, I think the county and the city should focus their efforts on making the state do what their mandate is. That's how I feel about it, and
So, okay, but the alternative, you understand, is that the state might say, yeah, that, we'll do this. By the way, our office is gonna be in Pendleton, and you're gonna have a hell of a time, getting building permits passed and all the rest
so
of that.
here's the deal. We're doing a pretty poor job of financing our mandated services as it is, which is gonna be part of the conversation later tonight. I have a real hard time supporting anything iffy at this point. I think we should focus our efforts on the
Well, you
things
don't
we're
have anything
supposed to be
iffy
doing.
yet, Russ. First of all, I think generally, money that comes in from building permits would support a program, would it not? You don't.
Well, if the
you agree with
county,
that?
if the county administrated the program, clearly Tyler doesn't think it would pay for it. Why do we think it would pay for it? You
Volume?
understand what I'm saying? If they're talking about doing the whole program in here, and
Well-
if they don't think it's dollar smart, then why are we thinking about doing it?
Well, I think it has to do with volume. And the county, like Commissioner Kramer said, the county doesn't have the volume that the city of the Dalles has.
But if they took the program on, they'd have the same volume that we would.
Not unless they took the city too.
Well, it seems unlikely they'd bother taking on just the county. Not to say you might not, but I'm pretty sure Tyler probably wouldn't think that was very bright either, because you'd still have to have the same people. You'd have to have the same staff. I understand there's problems in the building code program, but I still think we should focus our efforts on making the state do what they're supposed to be doing.
Okay, we're gonna get about, here's my thinking, we're gonna get, I don't know, 103,000, somewhere in there, back from McCog, the city.
Approximately.
Yeah, approximately that, and so that's money that we didn't have, that's money that's after the sale of their building and all the rest that we're gonna get back, and I suggested to Julie, and I haven't said that here yet because we haven't had this meeting, but I'll say it today, that could be used in terms of some of the money to investigate whether or not we could do this feasibly. I don't think we've had a full investigation as to what it would take and if we could do it. If after that investigation, we said, doesn't look feasible, I suppose that's one way to look at it, but I kind of feel like, we're trying to bring in business into this town, and right now, we've got, kind of a fragmented situation, and if new businesses and contractors and entrepreneurs have to deal with, Pendleton to get a building code, I don't think that we're servicing the area. I would be, pro having us investigate to see if we could do it and also do the counties. That would be my position.
But you don't get to vote.
What?
You don't get to vote.
No, but you don't have all the information yet.
I've got enough information, and if you provide more information, I might change my mind.
Okay,
I'm
that's
just
all I'm
saying that.
asking, is I think we need to have a little bit more information.
But the
This is a
time's kind of
preliminary
short,
look at
isn't
it.
it, Julie? Fairly
Well,
short time frame.
Wasco County will decide whether or not they want to do it at their meeting on Wednesday, is that correct?
That's part of the discussion.
So you don't, not necessarily gonna make a decision?
I would hope that we would make a decision, but I have two other fellows and I can't speak for them.
So a couple things because we don't know what the state legislature is gonna do, it may be prudent for us to wait until they're back in session and something happens or doesn't happen before we decide, because as I understand it, and Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, we don't have to do this right now. We can apply at any time we want to apply, but if we have the program, we have to keep it for a minimum of 4 years. So waiting is not a bad option either, because it gives us time to do more investigating without kind of being on the hook, so to speak, that saying we do want it or we are gonna apply to take it. And if the state comes back and says, yes, you cannot have any contract employees, that would be a difficult position for the city to be in as well. I don't
But
know.
if we just tell the state we're gonna do an investigation, you believe, Steve, that they'll give us the time?
That was part of the conversation that I've had with the state, is that we're looking at this December 31st deadline of this year. That's
Right.
the letters that went out to the counties on the discontinuance of the service. So I asked what would happen if the city were interested in assuming a local program, is that deadline still apply? And they said no, that once we've indicated there is an interest, just to go through this process, this determination, there is a process, a structured process and schedule. Right? So we wouldn't be holden to that December 31st deadline. So we can take the time to go through that process. If the city and/or the county decide not to pursue or to assume a local program, then there is a 4-year waiting period. The state will have that for 4 years before.
Two.
No,
They're saying 2 years.
It's 2 years.
And I thought I read 2 years someplace in here.
that's an error in the report, that in a subsequent email conversation that I had, it is a 4-year waiting period.
Both 2 years and 4 years are in your
Yes.
They're different
document.
things.
So the question that I have for the commissioners is, did you guys ever find out on the surplus of revenue, if that surplus can be used for startup costs?
That reserve fund right now is frozen.
Why?
It will not be touched until decisions have been made by all 4 entities.
There'll probably be
And so
lawsuits about that,
who's the deciding
won't there?
factor on the surplus? I mean, it's gonna be those 4 entities that are gonna say what can be done with that surplus?
Research is still being done to determine those factors.
I mean, to me, that's the biggest kicker right there
Right
is
there, but-
if the city has to absorb all the costs of a startup, a tenant improvement, vehicles and whatnot, then
That's not,
it's a little bit more complicated. But if that surplus gets to be used for the startup cost of building codes, then I think it's a little different model that we're looking at.
And I wouldn't disagree with that.
Yeah,
I'm-
the thing that I understand though is that, we were told unequivocally on the McCog board by the other 3 counties, that, the only thing that they would agree with is either the county or the city, whoever took it over, had to, give them services at our cost. No extra for travel or anything else. And that was non-negotiated and it had to be in perpetuity. And that was it, no other discussion. So what I would see either way, I mean, I don't know, I can't make a decision for the county, but I would assume that, if the county decided to do it, without those 3, I know that if the city decided to do it, even if we did Wasco County, I would say, don't do that. Then what's gonna have to happen is they're gonna have to do an audit and say, where did this reserve come from? Because a lot of it came from wind farms, and some of it came from Design LLC. And so those dollars have to stay or go with where they came from. So, obviously Sherman and Wheeler and some of those would get their money, and so the amount would be less. And that would have to be determined before any use of the money would occur. Is that correct? Is that your understanding?
That's my understanding.
I thought it went with the program, so, for instance, if the state said we'll take over building codes, that the reserve went to that program, so they have.
There's still too many factors to be involved because no decisions have been made.
Okay, thank you.
But I think the general rule of thumb that we know from what we've been told, at least on the McCog board, is that the reserve must follow where the building codes go.
Well, that's what I just said.
All of the reserve?
Well, again, let's say that Wasco County said they were gonna do the city and those 3 counties in
Correct.
itself. Then the money would go with Wasco County. Right now, it's just in a reserve, fund. And there are different rules for, different kinds of permits. There's a kind of a more stringent rule of how you can use permits for electrical as opposed to other permits. And so we need all of that fleshed out for us.
So if Wasco County and the city of the Dalles sets up their own entity and the other counties don't, would they remove that money from the reserves that were put in supported
Whatever
by?
their share is, that would be removed, and they would probably go to Pendleton, where there is a building, code department. I don't know, but it's sort of,
But the state-
that's my conjecture.
The state could decide to put a building codes office here, based upon the
could.
amount of volume that Wasco County experiences. I mean, countywide, with the city and the county and the other, it would make sense for them to have a fully staffed office here. So saying it's gonna go to Pendleton is premature, and maybe even a
Because
scare
that's sort of
tactic.
in their letter and
Well,
application.
I could see them approaching Hood River County about it.
I think
I mean, that would make the
it
most
would
sense.
make a lot of
and,
sense for them to keep it more local
It
than
would still be
Pendleton.
unfortunate for us, you know, obviously I'm looking at it, from a different perspective, because it affects me personally, but yet, you know, we have to make sure that it's gonna make sense for the city. And I really think that the surplus funds are the low-hanging fruit. We really need to get an answer on that before we can proceed, in my mind.
I agree with that.
I mean, I don't have any issues with any of the inspectors. I don't know, maybe Mr. Wood, you could weigh in on that. Never mind, you don't operate with a license or a bond, so I guess you can't answer that. But where I was going was the plan review process has been a little bit muddled, but.
Is it improving?
It is improving, yeah. You know, the problem they had was some staff turnover. Seems like they've got a decent crew in there now, and so, I mean, you know,
So that's an
things are definitely
experience that
moving in the
could
right
happen
direction.
Regardless of who had it, if there's a, I mean, that's just something that can happen, a staff turnover.
Correct,
can
yeah.
slow down.
Do you think part of the reason that they haven't expanded the services is because they don't know if they're gonna be involved in the services
That
within
could
the
be.
next year or so?
I think they're waiting to see what's locally, what will do.
I think at the beginning, they didn't have anybody in the office that could do plan review, because they were sending it all to Salem. And now they have someone that can do the smaller type stuff, so.
Wasn't that kind,
But you did say in your document, it was noted that a longer-term staffing solution could involve serving the Mid-Columbia area from the Pendleton office.
That's
So why
correct.
did you say that?
That's what I was told.
That's what you were told, okay.
Why'd you say that?
And Mayor, if I could also revisit that 2-year, 4-year period. This is an email from Wendy McKay. Wendy is the Northwest Regional Coordinator for the Building Codes Division, and I had asked her a series of questions. She was also very helpful in providing some of the permit and revenue data. So in answer to my questions, one, she said the 4 counties already hold the delegated programs. Currently, BCD is administrating them for the counties through an IGA. So the counties would need to apply to assume the program. We're speaking about if Wasco County were to go forward. They can just terminate their participation in the IGA and start running the programs themselves. That's an option. If any or all of the counties determine they wish to relinquish their programs, the state will assume them at that time. In this scenario, we are required by rule to administer those programs for the following 4 years, so that the counties cannot apply to reassume those programs for at least 4 years. If the city wishes to run their own building program, it needs to apply to BCD to assume it from Wasco County, cites the statutes. The short story here is that the city will need to present a case for assuming all the inspection programs and maintaining them in a financially viable position for at least 4 years. And that's one of the attachments that I've included to the report.
So one of the things that I think people need to understand is what happened in terms of history is that early on when we were breaking up McCog, the state said literally to McCog, you know, somebody has to assume responsibility even though we may bring in the inspectors, et cetera, or we're gonna take it now. And that's why Wasco County assumed it, kind of as a holder, a placeholder, while they try to decide. So that's why we're in this situation. And so then they've been saying to Wasco County, we would like you to decide, and here's the time frames. But it's been kind of an anomaly with the county assuming responsibility, but the state providing the services. But that's okay. I mean, that's the way we had to go in terms of going through the transition.
Now, I believe the complaints that we've been hearing from the building services, I believe those have been tapering off recently, but there was a time when we were receiving several a week, and it was typically for plan review and/or scheduling inspections. And for plan review, one of our downtown projects, the Hono Building, when those plans were submitted, and I forget if they were mechanical or something they were doing, they were told at the time, or we were told at the time that it would be 4 to 6 weeks for those plans and permits to be reviewed and issued, and it took over 10 for that. So those guys couldn't follow along. And we received a number of complaints. I did say they have been tapering off lately. However, one of the items that still is kind of troublesome to us as your city planning department is that on some of our code enforcement efforts, when we go out to look at property maintenance cases and et cetera, or we get complaints about illegal construction, we'll go out and take a look at it, and we don't know if it's illegal construction or not, and so we'll contact the building office and we'll say, we have a situation, an address, we'd like you to go out and look at this and see if this work is being constructed according to code or what needs to happen. And the response has been, well, we don't do that. Unless we have a building permit application on file, we won't go out and inspect the site. Well, we suspect they don't have a building permit, so how can I get you out there? I'm sorry, we don't do that. So there's kind of this catch-22, and I don't know if that's from this office particularly, or if that's the way the state operates on these field
It
offices.
does seem strange. The one thing that I keep hearing is this issue, which you talk about on page 2 also, minor plan review is conducted locally with most plans reviewed in their Salem office. And that seems to be creating extensive delay.
Well, it's typically done by overnight delivery. I mean, in my past experiences using contract people, they would overnight the plans. There would be a courier system involved, so they would get to the head office within 1 or 2 days, do the plan review. There are some architects and some developers will use digital plans, electronic plans, and they can be sent electronically for plan review. I know a lot of the old-time plan reviewers, they like the hard copy plans because you typically have comments that you write on them and you send those back for more than one round of reviews. So there is that,
Is the
overnight
amount
delivery.
of time to go to Salem, is that decreasing, getting better? Are you hearing that?
Well, again, those are for the structural, the more complicated things. I think they're doing non-structural and some other the minor work in-house now at their office.
Most residential plan review is now done in-house. And they've been pushing the electronic plans, and that's actually sped up the process. So, but again, yeah, when there is some issues that need to be marked up, and it does seem to have a lag time either way, it doesn't matter if it's electronic or hard copies, but, where we are now versus where we are this spring is leaps and bounds better. So.
That's good to know.
And I would think most residential work will either go through one, possibly 2 rounds of plan review, single-family homes, minor things, small commercial. When you get into more complicated, you're going through at least 2 or 3 rounds of plan review.
No matter where codes are?
No matter where, that's been my experience.
Okay.
Well, if you did more study, what more information do you think that you would gain separate and apart from what we have here? Just this answer to the question about whether or not you can use part of the reserve funds, or are there other issues that?
The question of the reserve funds is, I think, one of the paramount questions before the council can make a decision.
I agree.
And what dollar amount that is. Stated in the report was, the city of Hood River, they're looking right now as possibly bringing in and having an in-house building official. So they've hired a firm to look at that, as analysis. Quite honestly, we were provided some information long-term from permit activity and revenue. McCog didn't go and start using the state system until just a few years ago. So there's a knowledge gap. We are coming out of recession, economy was down for several years. And so one of the things I would be concerned about is these past couple of years just might be an aberration, just might be an uptick in the economy, the pent-up demand. We are seeing a strong continued demand for residential. And I think we're going to see more of that. Most of the applications in the planning department, it seems this past year, have been minor partitions, minor lot splits. it's telling me that people with large lots are starting to subdivide those, and they're building 1 or 2 units at a time. You know, we don't have the merchant tract builders in town for a number of reasons. So you are going to continue to have that. I see, you know, more activity in the downtown and some commercial activity. It seems like the revenues that have been generated over the last few years, and I've got some numbers on that dating, I think, from 2012 to 2018. Permits within the city were almost 6,500 permits. I can't tell you what those permits are. I didn't bring that information, but it was, you know, $3.5 million in revenue. You know, building services try to be cost revenue neutral, with the revenues coming in, paying for either consultant contract staff or in-house employees. It's not going to be 100% generated by building revenues. I think there will be some impact on the general fund. But again, you do need, I would think there would be a higher service levels. As part of the, you know, planning office, you know, we look at development, we should be looking at development from the beginning of the application period to the final C of Os and final inspections. If we had the program in-house, we would have that information available. We'd take ownership of that whole process, that program. You know, the way it is now, we do the planning, we do the entitlement at the planning commission, we review the plans to make sure they're conformed to development standards of our city, and then we pass the ball over to the state. And the information's available to us, but it's not, I just can't walk down the hall or pick up the phone to the building official and ask about, I see some construction going on at 123 Main Street, for instance. You know, and for your office to be responsible for development throughout the city, that portion's missing. I mean, we have access to it, but as a director, I can't walk down the hall and tap on the shoulders of the building official and ask his or her opinion about something. In the past, we've had a few situations where there's been activity, building construction activity going on. The project planner will go out and take a look at it. Comment will come back to me, well, it's not quite the way I remembered it getting approved by planning commission, and there have been adjustments out in the field. And we'll call the building inspector on this, and they'll say, well, I don't enforce city regulations. It met building code setbacks, not the zoning. I'm okay with that. There's a level of disconnect. You know, communication can be improved, whether it's in-house or with a state facility, but still, it gives us a sense of ownership in the development process from the beginning of the application period to when that C of O is finally issued on a project.
I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I really feel like if the city can do it, and if the city can make this a more welcome place for more businesses and more development and make it a better experience because we're doing it, then that's one of our highest priority. And, you know, one thing I am concerned about is next round of Design LLC construction. I don't know how they handle the electrical inspectors on that. That's probably got to be huge. But also the fees of averaged about $1 million, so the money's there. Those would probably be contractor or something like that, but that was the only thing I would be worried about. I would really like to see, you know, an attempt to pencil this out, and so the council has a real good idea of the cost, the pros and cons, the risks, you know, and then they can make a decision, and get that decision about the, if we can, I don't know who's gonna make that decision about the use of the reserves. In your discussions, Chair, have you asked the state to give you an opinion, or is there a legal person looking at it?
At this point, no.
Okay. Do you have any idea how that's gonna go about happening?
Well, I can tell you from the conversations that we did have that they are really interested in looking back that far because of all the efforts and the the man-hours that it would take to dig into that.
They'd like to charge us for that?
No, I can't, no, I didn't say that, I didn't say that. But it's can of worms.
I thought there was
And,
some idea that maybe only going back a couple of years might be the answer.
I'll have to defer to Commissioner Agee because I haven't heard that.
Well,
If you only went back a couple of years, isn't there like a $3 million surplus or something?
3.5, I think.
Yeah, if you only
More?
went back 2 years, that would be a considerably smaller chunk of change if you were only taking into consideration the last 2 years of building permits, wouldn't it?
Well, again, a lot of the money, that came in historically got spent over time. But, because, I think we've had 2 permits, I'm just guessing here, but I think we've had 2 permits of $1 million or more from Sign LLC, and then there've been large chunks that came in from the wind tower. So all we're talking about is an audit to find out where the money came from. I guess the question is, how far do they have to go back to say, well, this money that came in has been spent, so these reserves really start from this year on? I don't know.
Well, if there's $4 million in reserves,
3.5.
well,
Is it 4 now?
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
I don't know how you, I would guess that the farther back you went, more of the money would have come from the wind farms in Sherman County or wherever they came from. And,
Probably.
I don't see how you can, you're talking like you can somehow divide it up into pieces, and
Who's
My-
making the decision?
Sorry?
Who's making the decisions regarding that reserve?
Depends on the jurisdictions, depends on where the jurisdictions want to go. What decisions that the jurisdictions make. Whether to keep the program, move the program.
I'd be surprised that if it somehow got split up to where one building code place wasn't taking care of everything, there'd probably be some lawsuits in order for like the folks to the east get their chunk of the change that's in surplus.
There again, you've got to look back, and Mayor Lawrenson stated it earlier, that the cost to go to Sherman County, Gillum County, Wheeler County costs more. Have we used up those permits, taking care of those new permits that we've had to go out? It's a big can of worms, and we've got a lot of work to do, but that's why we're trying to sort out who is going to assume responsibility. If we all decide that, this is my personal opinion now, if we all assume that the state is to take it over, in my mind, that reserve follows the program.
Yeah,
Period.
I think we've heard that.
Where that goes, does it go to general fund, does it stay in the area? Who knows? We're at that mercy. But that's my personal feelings on that piece, but
I thought we'd
been
been-
differently.
I thought we'd been told that it always had to stay with building
It
permits.
has to be used for building code purposes.
Yeah.
And so how do the other county commissioners feel about that? Sherman and Gillum, have they expressed any opinions similar to yours? Don't really know yet.
Mr. Elliott, we sent him a proposal, and they didn't like the proposal, they didn't counter, they didn't respond other than, we don't like that arrangement, and that's where it's at today.
Well, Tom McCoy, I think, represented the 3 counties, and his position was quite clear. Either if you want to do it, you have to do it at the same cost you charge for in-city work, and it has to be forever, or we're not going to be a part of it. But they didn't say how that would happen.
Well, then, if Pendleton took over the building codes for them, they'd be demanding the same,
No, they wouldn't have the same issue. What Mr. McCoy says is, you guys, being McCog, promised us that this would never change.
has he got it in
Even though
writing?
McCog's being dissolved. Any other feeling about the next step?
Yeah. I agree with you that I'm in favor of investigating the feasibility to bring building code servicing within in-house. I would like to know more, especially the reserve fund, the amount of dollars, need to have that figure, and any attachments and how those funds are going to be split if it doesn't come to this county, for example. So we need to have those questions answered before we can go to the next step, in my opinion. In the meantime, I would still like to see encouraging the state to streamline applications. And what's happening, what you're sharing with us, is that they're making improvement, and also to give them some sense of stability so that they can hire. I understood that there was temporary employees in the program after McCog. Is that true? It was kind of like ambiguous, and there's no stability. So we have to get through this process before we can offer that for the local contractors. So I think we need a lot more questions answered before I can.
So is anybody opposed to having a say to the building codes? We're gonna investigate. It sounds like
No.
Russ originally didn't want even to say that.
I guess, I was looking at the timeline, the program's supposed to fold, what, December 31?
Yeah,
And
that's what I
that's
thought,
not
too.
very much time to get information that the county's probably been trying to get for a
Well,
while.
don't you have a meeting on this specific topic coming up?
On the 17th or 19th?
19th.
Couldn't we wait to get a report back, the outcome of that meeting? I'd like to, that's what I would prefer to do. And then, I don't know if we schedule another meeting to discuss this, but we can either do it through email or,
I don't have a lot of confidence after hearing the conversation tonight that I can find out about those reserves. I don't know.
yeah, that concerns me as well.
Unless we can use those monies for startup costs, I won't support.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't make good sense, and like I said earlier, you know, if Tyler thought there was a buck in it for the county, he'd have probably been fighting for it, you know, that's his job.
Mr. Brown, we cannot maintain a program on 10% of the permits, period. And so then we have to partner with the city to garner the other 80%, which would then give us 90, which would pay for the program.
But then
Even an 80, even 75% would maybe get us there.
But then we'd be financing your permit program, basically. I mean,
We'd be partnering with somebody we try to partner with all the time.
We do other things with city, with, I don't see that as being, I think if we work it out mutually agreeable to both parties, I think we could pursue this where everyone wins. If it's economically feasible to do it, and that's the major question we can't answer right now. Am I wrong?
Is the question more for, what's left of McCog's attorney or the state on that surplus? I guess that would be my confusion, I mean.
From my understanding, my memory, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think anybody had ever asked the state that question before. It was a new question. You don't remember? Okay. I think that's what they said to us at the very beginning when we asked that question. They said, well, we're gonna have to look at it.
Let's get in writing.
Well, or can we move forward with the assumption that that money is not going to be broken out and that we will move forward and it will stay with the program? Okay. See what I'm saying? Making the assumption moving ahead without having it being split from the other counties. That's,
But then you're assuming that we would serve the other counties, and you'd have to be willing to serve them
Oh, I
at no
see.
increase for travel.
oh,
There's a whole bunch of problems.
That piece, I think, is off the table from
Yeah.
my understanding of what Commissioner Kramer said, is that the other counties are not interested in participating
Oh.
under Wasco County.
okay, I understand.
So I don't think that's an issue. My big question is also the reserves, because I'm not comfortable saying that we can start up a program using general fund revenues. That takes me way, way out of my comfort zone. I wouldn't.
So are there any other funds that are generated through the state that they share for bringing in code, building code?
No, it's like an
So-
enterprise zone fund, kind of, like it just stays with that program.
Okay, so just the program itself generates the fund to support its operation, but there's no state funding that comes in to supplant?
No.
I just, okay,
Yes.
Yeah, Ms. Kruger, the other counties will participate, but they want to do it under their guidelines.
Yes, I
So that's,
understand.
They-
we
they-
need that to be clear.
They want the services, they don't want to pay for them, essentially.
And we stated to them that, yeah, Wasco County has far reaches, and we know that we're gonna have to pay extra to have a permit in Shannico, Antelope, et cetera. It's just the cost of doing business anymore. You can't expect subsidies in this day and age, in my mind, with reserves. And so, the other reason that I'm here tonight is I haven't heard anybody talk about the partnership, the one-stop shop that we did have some conversations about. And partnering with the county and the city and providing the ultimate, service delivery for our consumer. And, I've talked with a few of you about that.
I agree, you have.
I think that, as we move forward, I think that's still an option, at least in my mind. I think that combining, putting our planners together, bringing environmental health, as in the water and the septic and the building codes, we get the assessor, we get all of those groups that are affected heavily by what our planners do. We only enhance our services to our constituents. So that's the other piece of the coin that I was hoping that you might all talk about in your work session tonight. And so, hopefully you'll consider that as we move forward, because,
But the last time, Mr. Kramer, that came up, it was on the basis of going in and buying the McCog building, and this council said it wasn't willing to do that.
well, yes, Mr.
And I didn't hear
That's
a proposal to continue that discussion after that.
So, well, and that's just me talking tonight.
Yeah.
That was my hope tonight.
I understand.
Is that you folks would maybe talk about that. And so, but, there's always potential. If we're here to serve the people, then we need to do the best we can with what we've got.
So your county administrator is not, from what I read, he's not proposing that we should do.
The county administrator doesn't run the county.
Okay,
County commission runs the county.
I understand that.
Recommendations, and if we don't like those recommendations,
So you're not liking his recommendation?
we redirect it. I'm not saying that I don't like it today. I may be liking that, but I haven't heard that
Okay.
we may have a step forward. So I have to get all of the information
Okay.
That just wasn't on our table, for tonight.
I want to know,
That's a whole new idea.
but if the county and the city going together in this, is it going to make it anything more than convenient for contractors? It's hard for me to believe that it would make it, the government doesn't get more efficient the bigger it gets. And it would take more employees to create this entity. I just see a lot of money going out the window and a lot of people getting nice jobs and nobody but the contractors benefiting from it.
Well, I kind of see your point there, but the contractors are not who we're working for. We're working for the homeowners, the developers, businesses. Those are the folks that are pulling the permits.
But it
The
still,
contractors aren't pulling the permits.
but it still has to make financial sense for the government to provide these services. Convenience shouldn't be the big deal. I mean, it has to be somewhat self-supporting at least. I mean, we don't need to take any more money out of our general fund, I'm sure of that. I'm sure you guys don't want to take any out of yours according to your county administrator that doesn't make the rules.
Well, I'm willing to take that money out of general fund to service my constituents.
Yeah, and I would counter that, Russ, that, I'll probably be shot. Shall I move this way a little bit? Our general fund is getting healthier every day, so those decisions should be made on a year-by-year basis. And I do think services are an integral part of why the city serves and why the county serves. This is their money, their taxes, and not only should we try to be frugal with it, but we should also try to do the best in providing services.
I fully agree with that. In your concept of a one-stop, that provides local control, and I think it would enhance your situation with planning, is that you have a coordination where you can call someone that you can get immediate. If you had that department aligned with your program, it would streamline the process. And I have seen the city and the county work together, and when we do work efficiently, both sides and everyone in the county benefits from that. When we do street, we share equipment, we share a lot of things between the two, county and the city. We're all a part of the same community. The county is not separate from the city. The city resides in the county of Wasco. So I see the effort of moving towards this as a goal. I'm worried that if we don't find answers to the concerns that we have, that somehow contractors will not be supported and somehow that would slow growth in the area. And I don't want to see that. It's bureaucracy overshadows what we want to see as a controlled growth of our community, and we want to enhance that. We want to make sure contractors are supported. So I'm in favor of moving towards that goal. If we find out that the costs are going to be too great, and if it interferes with our general fund, then we need to make a decision that we can't afford it. But until then, I don't have enough information to say yay or nay. But I am in favor of moving forward to find a resolution that we can all work together. And how we get there, there's still more answers that have to be answered, or there's more questions that have to be answered.
The only thing is that if we do take it on, it's ours for 4 years, right?
Right.
And if,
Taxpayers' money that funds the general fund would be subsidizing a program that should pay for itself through permit fees.
Maybe.
And so.
But we don't know
But
that.
we don't know that, but if we take it on for 4 years,
We're obligated.
we're obligated.
So that's where your concern is, over the financial risk that the city would encumber by doing this.
Particularly where we don't know what the legislature is going to do
Okay.
next year.
Well,
It just wanted to throw that out there. I understand your concerns and we can do our best to find the information, but there are a lot of questions that I have that can't be answered
Right.
that quickly.
Ultimately, if this were to happen, I think there would be improvement in the timeliness. But until then, I still think that we can work with the state to encourage them
I'm
to.
not sure I could even agree with that, Counselor. I think, the state's been running building code programs for however many years they've been doing it, 30,
Right.
40 years, and they're quite good at it and successful. I think
Provided that we have local, coming out of Pendleton, or not using all of the electronic means that we could use. Is there a process using computerization for this process, but it's just not being utilized, or,
it's being utilized to a degree, I believe.
but can we encourage more of that to streamline? I'm just looking at ways to find solutions in the interim until we can, make a decision on the direction that we want to go.
Mr. Scott?
I just had a couple comments. One thing was kind of Russ's comments about, could we do it more efficiently or not, would it cost more money? And I don't know the answer to that question. I know Steve and Julie were in a lot of discussions several months ago about that very question. But I think that the one thing that I'm very supportive of, if there's a way we could do it more efficiently for not only us, but for the citizens. I think that would be a good thing. So,
I agree, in a perfect world, but
Exactly.
there's a whole bunch of unknown
Yep.
factors here that, I need the answers before I would support it. I don't disagree with the concept. It would certainly, customer-wise, would be huge.
So the other thing is too, that I think in my mind, how I process it, there's $4 million out there that is a surplus that was generated, in my opinion, largely over the last few years, largely probably from projects that were in Wasco County. Now, there was obviously some money from the wind projects. Those were a long time ago.
Right.
So, who knows how it's gonna break out. So I think there's a substantial surplus that's been generated in the program in recent years. And depending on what happens in this community, there could be more substantial surpluses that are created in the future. But, that's the thing is, like, this program is basically kind of revenue neutral. You're not, the state doesn't expect you to do it at a loss. They expect you to do it at least a break-even scenario. So you set the fees at the level that you determine that the program is gonna break even at, or whatever you're gonna determine. Because the thing is you can't
Make
take
a
the money and move it over and give Julie a raise. Maybe.
Or by building.
Well, you can do some of those kind of things. I mean, there are.
But some of, we can't with
Julie
electrical,
raise?
we
Yeah,
found that
exactly.
out.
So there is some latitude. I've spoken, many of you, but I mean, John Roberts, who used to be our planning director, whoever does it, they think it's a great thing. It helps them, it helps them administratively. It's not a drag, and it's not like, now the challenge is construction goes like this, right? Tanner? So that's why surpluses exist, because it will go like this at some point, but it will probably come up. So, the idea is that you maintain a surplus healthy enough to get through the thing. But we would not do it at a loss. I wouldn't expect you guys to do it at a loss. I think we're hesitant about taking it on partly because of what Commissioner Kramer said about, it's 10% of the permits at ours, I think we're open to the idea of doing it together. We just didn't want to step out there and do it, when we have a pretty small. And I do think the state can do a good job, and I think they will. They've told me, this is just me, they're not gonna move the office to Pendleton. They said there's too much activity here to functionally operate it out of a remote location. So I think there will be an office here. It depends on, what's the level. And I also think, we can choose to make a higher service level if we want. I think there's some benefit, as Steve said, having that function in-house, whether it's together or even with you guys, because you can walk down the hall or you can go out to the person. So I think there's some benefits for us doing it, but right now, I think Tyler Stones is not super happy because, we got a lot on our plate as well. Adding this is one more thing, you gotta manage one more thing through that. So one more thing, our planning director, our situation was put in planning. Now, we've got to completely restructure our staffing out there because now she's got to manage planning. Now we've got to get problematic, but if we could do it together, I think it will take some time, but I think there could be some potential great benefits. But if you guys wanna do it, I support it. I want you to do it for Wasco County too, though, I mean, that would be my expectation. And when we were looking at it, we were expecting to do it for the city. I've never thought about it like, we're just gonna do it for Wasco County. That
Yeah,
would not make sense.
But that is what you indicated tonight. Well, we don't want to do it because it's only 10%.
That was just one thing, we were not, functionally, we just don't, it's not our jurisdiction as much as yours.
I
It
see.
wasn't so much that we were only gonna do the 10%.
Oh, I see.
I've never thought of it that way.
Okay.
I like the idea of the one-stop shop, and I think back when we were having those conversations, if we knew that the city and the county could have got paid back for that building purchase through building codes, I think that everybody would have had a different answer there. Maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but I definitely would have had a different answer.
I like the concept of a one-stop shop, and I prefer going forward, seeking more information, coming together, working together with county and city. I think that's a good relationship that we've had in the past, and I think it will be in the future.
I guess I'll just say one more thing. I think cities succeed when, at least in terms of ideas, we take some bold steps. And it may turn out that after we study something that it's not feasible or we don't want to do it, but this, I've been saying, this town has actually kind of gone through phase one, and we're going into phase two. Things are gearing up, things are happening faster, there's developers wandering through this town looking for opportunity.
I know that.
And I think we need to really take as much opportunity as we can to investigate the possibility of making sure we can do this in the best possible way. And if we can't, fine, but I don't want to do nothing. I would rather have us investigate it and see if we can get the state to give us an opinion sooner rather than later as to the reserve funds. I don't know what that takes. Maybe that takes some more conversation with the head of building codes or whatever, but I think we need to do that. I think we don't need to just not do nothing.
I agree with everything you
Double
said.
negative.
In addition to, we need resolution from the state on their direction that affects building codes throughout the state. So with that addition, I'm in favor of moving ahead, investigating the feasibility of working together.
Yes, sir.
I did one more final thing. So back to that point, Tim, the whole idea of having the ability to contract out some of these functions. It's a very high priority for AOC, and it's definitely on our legislative agenda to basically get that off the table. Because, for the state to tell basically ask local jurisdictions to take it and then tell you you can't
Can't do it.
contract out those functions you can't otherwise hire for is crazy. And so all of the counties are in the same thing. It's a very high priority for us, and we're gonna be pushing hard.
Okay.
And I'll find next week what LOC's position is on that, probably the same,
Yeah, I would guess.
hopefully. Is that within your ken to go ahead and do a little bit more investigating for us?
We will do our best.
All right.
That's all we can ask.
Do you need any more, indication of what it is we're looking for?
Clarity is always important. So there was discussion about a potential county-city permit center. I mean, that wasn't the topic this evening. Is that something that the council thinks that there's a need to further explore? Or in this case, are we looking just at assuming a local building codes program that would be the city, incorporate the city and Wasco County?
I think in the
What
short
I
term,
heard
we're
was
concerned
either
about,
way. The county could take the city's program, administer it for us, or we could administer for them, was what I heard.
No, but he's asking, do we also want him to look at the possibility of a one-stop shop, both planning departments and.
I think the first question that needs to be answered is where the money's gonna come from. I think that's,
We're gonna raise
before
your
I want,
taxes.
yeah, thanks. Before I make a decision about whether I certainly have nothing against the concept of the city and the county going together and having a one-stop shop. I wanna know where the show me the money, I guess is what, yeah, I don't want this to have an effect on our general fund.
Right.
Well-
So we'll try to,
So that's pull it out of the air, we've got enterprise zone funds that are a potential.
How are we gonna finance it, the secondary? The going
I think there's
together,
a lot of
yes.
discussion that
The
can
first answer that I need is if some of that state surplus can be used to set up a program for the county and the city or anybody.
So
Or
we'll
if
look
it just
at
has
that
to languish
as
there
our
until we
primary
fall on hard times.
I think
and-
it is the
I
primary.
don't know how, it's not the state's money though, right? It's McCog's money right now. So what we need to find out is, does it follow the
It's building
program?
codes money.
Yeah, it's building
Oh,
codes money which McCog put into the, what's the investment? LGIP, being held there until there's a determination. Correct, Steve?
Correct.
Earning interest.
Until who makes a determination?
and if we could get,
State Or McCog?
some good
That's
Well,
my
answers.
I
problem.
think
know
McCog
that.
has a responsibility, and, you know, to find the answer to that before it, you know, agrees for the release of that.
McCog is done.
They're gone.
McCog is done.
Technically,
Other
yes.
than sending you a check.
Who is going to make the decision of when the money gets pulled out of LGIP then?
That will be a decision when the four partners
Right.
make the decision.
Okay.
Because there's 5 members of McCog, but River is no longer involved, so
Yeah,
it's
they
now
don't have any,
a 4
claim to
county
that.
question.
all right. That's why you're our chair. Or were.
I mean, if we can find out if that money's available to set up a program, then I think we should get together and have a conversation as soon as possible, because then we have, there's no point in making a decision on whether we're gonna join with the county or take our own program until we know what it's gonna take to get it started. If we can't get that money, then I can't, I won't support, having the city involved in it unless we can do it without endangering the
One vote.
general fund.
Thank
I know. And you don't have
So
one.
I guess that would be the priority, is to try to get that answer as soon as possible. All right. Mr. Anderson,
Thanks,
you
Steve.
showed up for street funding.
Let's get our red pens out.
So after much work, much research, I found the October 12th, 2015 memorandum on Design LLC, and you were right, and I apologize.
Thank goodness.
Wow.
And thank you.
I even listened to the recording. I don't know why I had
lived
that
long
stuck in
enough
my
to
You
brain.
had me very concerned. I was racking my brain what I could have
Well, I'm
possibly said
apologizing.
to confuse
I
that.
don't know where I got that in my brain, but it was stuck there. You were right. Thank you very much for being right.
You're welcome. Good evening, Honorable Mayor and members of council. Staff had received a request to develop some concepts around the idea of enhancing street maintenance funding even further to help catch up with the backlog of needed maintenance as we move forward into future years. This was, I think, partly in light of the fact and the understanding that we're doing a lot of the lower cost maintenance such as chip seals, but those types of treatments only work on our streets that are in some of the better conditions. And we need to get back to some of the business of repaving, profile and paving streets to take care of the ones that are in worse conditions. And that some of those projects have even gotten more expensive with the requirements to do associated curb and sidewalk improvements. Or excuse me, curb and sidewalk improvements where those systems exist. The staff report before you identifies, just for review, some of our the current funding sources for the transportation division.
As you can see, the lion's share of that funding comes from the state through shared revenues. Just over $1 million are budgeted in the current year, and that includes the increased funding from the legislation that was passed last year called House Bill 2017. We get over $500,000 a year from our local 3-cent gas tax. We do surcharge our own water and sewer utilities because of their impacts on this transportation system, and we surcharge those at 3% of their gross rate revenues. And then we have been for several years now dedicating $81,000 from the Northwest Natural Gas franchise fee towards street maintenance. Council will recall that this year we did not include the $150,000 contribution from the general fund, which we had done the 3 years prior. That was because we had seen some increase in funding from the state, and we also had a fairly large carryover from prior years. And we also understood that the general fund was taking on some expenses this year and having some challenges. So it was a good year that we felt to take off from that $150,000 contribution, but that's another source of revenue that's been used in recent years prior to that. The staff report identifies a number of different ideas that could be explored for street funding enhancements. Several of these you have seen in the past. I won't spend a lot of time, but we can certainly talk about or answer any questions about them. But one was the idea of developing a dedicated funding source to pay for street lights. Another one was to increase the Northern Wasco County PUD franchise fee to something above the current 3%. Understanding though that the PUD would probably then pass some of that or all of that onto their ratepayers. So I think that should be understood if that option were selected. Another idea that's been discussed in the past is the establishment of a franchise agreement for the Chenoweth Water PUD. They're currently the only utility located in the city right-of-ways that does not have a franchise agreement. The local 3-cent fuel tax could be increased. That would require a vote of the people to do that. Each penny of that tax generates about $170,000, so we would, going from a 3 to a 4% would add that much to our maintenance revenues. As I mentioned, we could go back, anticipate going back to a contribution from general fund if that was the desire of the council as we prepare future budgets. And then there was a new idea that was generated, and we wanted to include it in here for council's consideration. And it's basically a street maintenance surcharge that would be charged on the water and sewer bill, similar to the current $2 a month stormwater charge that's utilized to help fund our stormwater system capital improvement plans. Every dollar of if we just charged it per account for in-city water and sewer accounts, each dollar of that fee would generate about $129,600 a year. One concept might be to implement a street maintenance surcharge fee at a higher level for a while to help us catch up, to let us do more contractual work that would supplement the amount of work we could do in-house. Maybe starting at $5 a month for a period of time. At $5 a month, that would generate about $324,000 a year. It could either remain at that level, it could be reduced in the future to some other level. We ran numbers for $2 a month, which would be the $129,600. I think I misspoke a moment ago. Each dollar generates $64,800, not the $129. The $129 is $2 a month. So that was another idea. And again, a street maintenance fee like that could be permanent, it could be temporary, it could be established and in effect until rescinded or sunset upon further consideration of council. I think there's a lot of options around how a fee like that could be set up if it was something that the council wanted to explore. So these were some ideas that we came up with, again, just for the council to consider whether there was any interest in trying to move forward with implementing any of them. The conversation is timely at this time because We have a few months now before we'll begin developing the next budget. And it would be helpful to understand what the council's desires are around street funding as we develop that budget. With that, I would certainly entertain any question or help support any conversation.
You know, that one of the things I'd like to see cleaned up is, for no less than 2 years, we've been talking about taking the street lights out of the street department. The general fund gives the street department $150,000 and then takes $112,000 out of it for the street lights. I think the street lights should be a general fund item because it really, well, I suppose. I don't know. I just think it's kind of silly to do it the way we're doing it. I just don't, $150,000 out of the general fund and then take most of it back for
But
the
that's
street
only
lights.
happened 2 years. The $150,000 contribution from general fund was not something we've done for a long period of time. It's been a short-term kind of.
But we've talked
Band-Aid
about doing
approach.
away with the street lights.
But that wasn't spent on streetlights, that was spent on, street maintenance.
But it's like you put it in this pocket and then take it out and.
We do that every day in this budget.
Well, it's the financing, because the street department is kind of the illegitimate child of the city. It generates none of its own revenue other than the gas tax. We can't say that it actually generates anything.
Who's
So
that?
the street
Oh, street
department
department.
has no revenue source.
It's not a
It doesn't
commodity that we
create
sell
any.
like.
Yeah, it's not like water and sewer.
State transportation package that was approved, that was implemented last year, does that have an escalating
It does.
revenue? So what's next year? Do you know?
Yeah, over the 10-year, it escalates about $100,000 over what it was supposed to start at. So it's roughly $20,000 a year, or $10,000 a year on the escalation. This year, it's interesting because the county's original projections were that this first year, the state's original projections were that this first year we would see about $315,000 increase. The actual increase that, when the state revised their numbers and gave us for state share and revenue, only increased by about $217,000. So, you know, I think some of that really has yet to be proven up in terms of real-world experience as those permit and fuel fees take effect. But I think we can anticipate around $10,000 a year increase over what we've budgeted for this year.
Part of the problem I see is we're working with a backlog, a huge backlog. I mean, I doubt there's, and I think I've had this conversation with you, I personally doubt there's probably 10% of the streets in town that wouldn't benefit from some kind of maintenance, even streets that were paved within the last 5 or 6 years. You know, I'd like to get us caught up to a place where we're doing chip seals before the surface goes to pieces, rather than afterward. And I think in order to do that, we're gonna have to have a surge of funding, like perhaps this maintenance fee on the utility bills for a period of time, so we can contract out some stuff and get caught up to the point where it doesn't make any sense for the street department, in my opinion, to hire a whole flock of people and try to get all this work done, because then when you get caught up, you got a whole bunch of people standing around twiddling their thumbs, and so I think contracting it out, or at least part of it, is the best way to get caught up. But
And that's the way we've generally tried to think of it. I think there's still a lot of work that we can do within city resources at a much lower cost than contracting work, for sure. As we're getting a better and better understanding of our pedestrian crosswalk or ramps requirements, I think perhaps additional contractual work may involve the engineering just to get us caught up on. What we're finding is we can't really just put out a typical ramp design. We pretty much every corner needs to be designed associated with a project. And, you know, it's 1 to 2 intersections per week is all we can accomplish within our engineering staff. We may look at using some, doing some contractual work just on the engineering side in support of what would have normally been a pretty routine profile, which is grinding out the old asphalt and repaving project just to do the associated concrete work. And then we contract out that concrete work. So these are some of the things that we see higher costs in terms of eventually getting caught up.
These folks probably maybe haven't heard, but maybe you could go into a little more detail about the ADA requirements. They, as it was explained to me anyway, that before you just pretty much put a typical ramp in and nobody was checking exactly what the grade was, and now they insist on what, 3% or?
That's 2% or less.
Yeah.
And it's on
2% angle?
Yeah.
slopes.
No matter what the topography is
there are-
of the area.
I think a couple of dozen measurements now taken with each sidewalk ramp or driveway cut. Anytime we put a driveway cut in a street, it's also got to have a fairly level, I'll call them a wheelchair bypass, so that the wheelchair doesn't end up on the slope part of the driveway cut. So it's not just the curb cuts at the end of, at the intersections. Sometimes it reaches back to these driveway cuts too. There, as a result of a lawsuit that ODOT lost in the city of Bend, and a settlement agreement associated with that, and the ODOT's requirements now are very, very stringent. So if they've got any state funding involved, we have to comply with that. And all they're really doing is implementing the federal standards that are already in place and having a higher commitment to do that. We still follow ODOT specifications. ODOT has now revised their specifications because they used to have their specs for these slopes right at the limit. And then if the contractor missed it a little bit, well, that was okay. Well, now they've lowered, tightened up the specs and actually reduce them below what the maximum are. So that allows the little bit of adjustment that occurs with concrete work as concrete settles and flows and all that kind of thing, to allow a little more tolerance, but they have really tightened those up on their projects, and we're looking at having to do the same thing.
But are those engineering costs, or are those, I mean, once the engineering is
It's gonna be a
done-
little bit of both. It's gonna be a little bit of both, because there's also now we believe, we're still kind of in the early phase of this, ODOT's in the early phase of this, but there's also going to be a challenge getting concrete contractors up to speed on the experience and actually doing it right.
Oh.
We're seeing bid costs for ramp construction going up. And then, like I say, we're anticipating these higher engineering costs because we can't just say, go out and put in a ramp. We need to actually design and give the actual dimensions because of the varying topography and site conditions of every single ramp. We've got to design every single one as part of a project. And I think that's going to be one of the areas where we're going to want to get some help spending some money on contractual engineering to move our projects forward.
As I understand, we don't have any ramps that currently meet
No
the
doubt finding
requirements.
that they, over 90% of their ramps on their own projects are failing, even ones that were built.
Well, they're gonna have to go back and be redone?
And one of the requirements for us and for them is they have to develop a transition plan. How you're gonna get from where you are now to, now you can have a long time to do it, and we're working on that plan right now. But if you're called to task, you know, you're gonna be in a much better place having a plan to show that you are making progress, you have committed to a plan of improvement.
I'd rather have a street maintenance ADA fee.
Well,
And-
sounds like that's what that would be, because that would chew up all the revenue you were generating.
You may recall that in the,
That might be more acceptable.
Right.
and that might very well be an approach that you want to take. We would I think,
Cause
We're
then you
working on
can
this
kind of
transition.
estimate how many there are,
Yep.
how many you have to do, how many years it's gonna take you to do it, and it could be, have a sunset,
and that was what I was just,
theoretically.
that's what I was just gonna suggest, was probably, we would be in a much better place to justify, the fee and how much and for how long, once we complete the plan.
Right.
And have something in front of you and say, this is a funding mechanism to get there. Now, if that does everything that the council wants to do in terms of catching up with needed street maintenance and having enough funding for that, that's,
Well, it doesn't.
But it won't, I
I mean,
mean,
it.
But we had the conversation at budget about street maintenance. We
did,
didn't
and
put
that,
any more money into it
No,
because
we felt it was healthy this year.
because we had a pretty big carryover, and the other thing I heard in the budget discussion was an interest now by council to do more of the more expensive street maintenance activities, the grinding and repaving, and so, and those are tripping these discussions
There's
about
less projects.
ADA ramps and things like that.
15th Street.
What's that?
15th Street.
15th Street, yes.
By the Fort Dell Museum.
Yes. I snuck in the one block right by the museum.
That's what I'm talking about.
the buses use that block, they don't use the rest of the blocks. I did get them to
You're
go
not
up and,
there anymore.
they put a bucket of, I finally got them to put a bucket of cold mix in that pothole that was in the middle of whatever it was, 15th and
So, you know what, well, I'm not gonna talk over all these other ideas yet, but, the thing that I don't understand and the thing that I would like to understand better, and maybe just being able to lay it out, are the cost of continuing, street maintenance versus backlog priorities. And when I say backlog priorities, I'm thinking of what I heard, when I first came into office was, you know, a really healthy street maintenance program would do 20% every year. And by the time you get through the 5th year, that 6th year is that you're going back and doing whatever needs to be done on that first 20. Now that's, I'm sure it doesn't work that, exactly that way because there are streets that are more used and all the rest of that.
if you could pave all year long, you might be able, and had all the money in the world, you might be able to have a program like that.
Well, but that's the ideal, and the other thing that strikes me is, you know, in driving all over the state, right now, we have roads that are far better than most towns that I go into.
We are not unique in the funding of transportation maintenance.
But I
Chuck.
mean, we're doing a better job. I go in other of these towns and the roads look like crap. So, you know, are we talking about these raises for the street maintenance or to try to get the backlogs so we eventually someday idealistically could ever get to that 2020, 2020?
So, I think, and I hate to do this to you, but I think it was actually, we anticipate in a fresh street, freshly paved street, a life of 20 years, so we were trying to do 5% a year. So I think,
Okay, that's fine.
I think those numbers were, but it's still the concept.
My brain is not working.
Yeah, it's still the concept is there. And, you know, the concern or the interest that I had heard that led with the preparation of this was, we're way outside, you know, we've got this backlog of a whole bunch of 5% that we didn't do. And there's interest in trying to figure out how to get caught up with those. Councilor Brown mentioned that I think he thinks we might need to do work on 90% of the streets, and I wouldn't even dispute that right now.
That makes me ill because we've done so much over the last 3 years.
I'm not saying we need to repave 90%, I'm saying that I would, there, 90% of our streets would benefit from some kind of maintenance right now.
And we actually are already looking at some of the higher traffic streets that we chip sealed are really ready for another chip seal. I mean, we had talked quite a bit about chip seals have a short life in an urban environment. We were hoping that might be the 5 to 7, and it is 5 to 7 on some of the moderate traffic streets and the lower traffic streets. But on the really high traffic ones, we're probably at 3 to 4 between chip seals.
Well, and we've got some like West tint that,
So-
that need to be profiled and inlaid, or something
Yeah.
more aggressive than a chip seal
So,
now.
so I guess I would try to give you some comfort that we did buy some time, but those are not long-lived treatments, the chip seals. So we still need to keep those on our list, and we're talking about funding a program that would be in effect for a number of years, not everything getting done next year.
Well, here's my take on these ideas. The streetlight thing intrigues me. The North Wasco County PUD, the fact that we're getting a franchise fee that is going up almost exponentially, I wouldn't mess with. The Chenoweth Water PUD franchise fee for a measly $28,000 a year, you might seriously impact their program. I know you can look at it and say, well, you're the only ones not charged, but you might want to we might have to look at their whole program and how healthy they are to withstand that.
Well, and I'll tell you about them, when they do cut a street, when their repair is better than the street.
The local 3-cent fuel tax, you know what that would mean? That would mean a pitched fight with some people, one of who I can name, but I won't. So, and the other thing was, which crossed my mind as I was reading this at home, business license fee.
Yeah, we have never,
And you don't think you'd get anybody squawking about that?
yeah, we would.
Well,
And how does it directly
how many
relate to the
towns don't
streets?
have a business license fee? I mean, it's kind of ridiculous we don't. We can't even figure out who all our businesses are because we have no way of tracking it.
The last time I was involved in any discussions around the business license fee was when I believe it was 2010, and we're discussing some of the temporary reductions and waivers for the transportation SDCs. And in those discussions, we were trying to figure out what the trigger would be for, assessment review of SDC, transportation SDCs. The idea of a business license was, if a business is changing, they've got to come in for their business license, that would be a good trigger if we had a business license. That group, and I believe the council at that time we talked about it briefly, there wasn't much interest in a business license.
I think we've had
But there are some things
conversations.
that it could do for us, and this would perhaps be another one of those. And I'm not advocating for one, I'm just saying that if the council wanted to consider if we could throw that into the mix of a conversation of street funding.
I think that,
I don't know
I was
that a
involved in a
business
conversation
license
about business licenses either shortly before I was elected, or I'm sure that, with planning department, it might have been, it may have had something tied into that sign permit deal, but it didn't sound like there was very much support from anybody.
The businesses?
But, well, from planning, I mean, at the.
I think the planning department would support business licenses.
It doesn't
also.
have to be
The former
a big
planner, I don't
amount.
believe, did.
No, it doesn't
It doesn't have to be a big amount, and there's a lot of reason to do it, as far as I'm concerned.
I
So
mean,
we
it's
can-
I'm not sure street funding is one of them.
No, I know.
I don't
Just,
think it would generate,
you were talking about the health of the budget, the general fund.
if you're selling alcohol in a business, you have to get, I think it's $25.
OLCC license?
Well,
Is that what you're talking about? Liquor
well, I know a
license?
liquor license. It was, I think we'd
It's
come in every year and we
$35
paid
for a renewal.
25, yeah.
But
In terms of street maintenance funding, that would be a much smaller pool of payers, if you will, into whatever amount of money we'd be trying to raise for street maintenance than applying it to all the water and sewer accounts, for example.
I'm in favor of the user fee personally. I'd like to see it taper off after a period of
It's a
time.
user fee.
This,
It's $5 a month fee added onto the utility bills. You can call it whatever you want. I just,
would you
I think
like
in the
staff
short
to
term,
develop a little more
it might
information on
generate enough money to support
What is the council?
engineering.
I'm not in favor of that.
not in favor of
You're running
using
for
it.
office. I'm kidding.
Well,
Doesn't affect that. I'm reluctant, fuel tax makes reasonable sense, even though we
Talk
don't.
about a few.
Yeah, I know that, but because that's specifically geared back to benefit what that tax goes to is roads.
That's gonna be going down the more we do non-fuel and electric car.
And we have a stormwater fee that's specifically for the stormwater and a sewer fee that's specific. If we had a user fee specifically for the streets, it would be, I don't know of any less offensive way of generating
Water
enough
and
money
sewer?
to.
So
So-
lower the water sewer bill to create this.
Water and
Oh,
sewer
yeah.
fees haven't
Yep.
been increased
Tim, we're
for
talking-
4 years now?
At $5 a month or $60 a year,
so no
it's not gonna
change,
bankrupt anybody.
so no change, just a flat $5 a month.
But I would like to, personally, would like to see it set up so that it doesn't go on endlessly. I'd like to see it at some point, maybe 5 years.
So is the
Cut it back to
stormwater
$3,
going,
huh?
is the stormwater, is there a sunset for that?
No,
That goes on forever?
yes.
Or-
Because
it
there's
can-
stormwater forever.
Or it can be, council can rescind it at any time, but it does not have a sunset on it currently. It was identified and established to help fund the stormwater master plan.
Do you think we'd need to keep it? You think that would be the best way to have a stable funding for
Well,
the
there's a couple of
streets?
ways, of course, we never know what's gonna happen with outside funding in the future. I don't expect the state to make another run at any additional shared revenues for a while.
Oh, I don't think so.
We're seeing state fuel tax collections go down just for some of the reasons that were already mentioned. It's increased efficiencies and alternative transportation. And so, they, even on the federal highway trust fund, they're concerned even at that level for continued funding. So I think it's good we're having this talk about what the options are locally, because I don't think our outside options are gonna necessarily go up over time, other than I've already mentioned that there's an increase built into the HB 2017.
From 2017? Well, any interest in having them do further research on any of those particulars? You're not in favor of any.
Well, I'm taking a look, in addition to concepts outlined, a new idea has been suggested to consideration to enhancing funding. I'm always looking for other revenue sources, but the reputation is the government's always looking for another pot and always increasing in some way, and we are doing that. Trying to find efficiencies in how we operate should be our primary, and then secondary, we look at those things that people have the ability, like this, the fuel tax. You did mention that would have to go before the voters.
Yep.
So there you give the voters a chance to say, yes, we support, or no, we don't support. And if we do a good enough job in selling the need, then we'll get the revenue increase. But the other ones, when we attach it to water and sewer, that,
We're not attaching it, Tim.
Well,
It's a fund specifically for streets. It's just like the stormwater fund is for the stormwater, the sewer is for the sewer. It's just a delivery device is all it is.
The reason that this water and sewer accounts were identified was it was a way to attempt to reach out to each property.
yeah, I
Assuming
understand,
they have
but it's
water and
still
sewer.
another, the last time we did the raising of this water and sewer rates, we heard a clamoring back, don't raise our rates because they're already so high. And what we don't want to do is get a reputation of just increasing. I don't know if we did a good job at justifying giving reasons for those, although we halted those increases. It was to pay for the water, or the storm and the sewer treatment plant development.
Yep.
So what we
And
did
we
is,
did it within our own assets.
that's because we found efficiencies and
Right.
technologies and those things that came back. That's the way government's supposed to work.
It's actually because we have higher usage.
Oh, and that contributed to it too. However,
Well, good.
however, there was increase in technology and a change, I think it was the company that
Yeah.
provided and the support that they brought their knowledge. I think it reduced our costs so we could reduce our increases, correct?
The design contract.
Well, we did the design-build contract as the way we made those improvements, but the biggest thing that's really allowed us to hold the rates the last 4 years has been the growth that we've had in the community, usage going up and selling more of the service at the rates that we had established. So
That too.
that increased usage, increased customer base has actually helped us keep up with inflation.
Well, then, when you have an enterprise growth happening, that when you put more usage on those roads because you're having growth, then some of that enterprise money should go back into developing infrastructure, water, sewer, roads, and all of those things. In fact, schools. That's another possible source of.
So one of the things that I think is kind of capturing the idea that you're talking about is, as we mentioned, that our customer base and usage for water and sewer have increased. That has kept up with inflation for us. That also means that 3% that we charge our water and sewer accounts has been going up. And those water and sewer funds have been contributing more to the transportation division and the transportation
Right.
funds to help offset their adverse impact on underground utility, or excuse me, on the transportation system. And there's a I mean, it's pretty clear, underground utilities have an adverse impact on transportation systems, because anytime you have to go in and do a cut, that shortens the life, no matter, how well the compaction is or how good it's sealed afterwards. It's a future maintenance item there.
But I remember through the years, changes in requirements and code changes, and ADA was one of them. Remember when we had the bronze in the water fountains and putting that in, that was part of it, and that cost another $30,000-$40,000. That had to come out of some fund.
We had to get rid of the lead in the.
Correct.
In
So
the brass fittings.
What do you guys wanna do?
So our increased usage, how much more is gonna go up this next budget cycle? Is there a projection?
I don't have, there will be, but I don't have it yet for you.
I know if the consumer were to wrap their head around a separate fee on this street fund, it would be a lot easier to take $1 from the water and the sewer if we have a projected increase to start the fund
I
before.
don't think we can because they're dedicated enterprise funds. Water can only be used for water. You can't reduce what you would give it to somebody else.
So the enterprise zone funds that we're getting, are they earmarked?
No, the Google 3, that's what I call it, Taylor Lake, there has not been a designation of how the 15 years are to be used. And there's gonna be a true-up for phase 2 coming, and we don't know what that is. So that could be, it's right, at this point, it's averaging around 1.2 million a year. And then it could be as much as 2 million a year with the true-up. And then there'll be a recommendation from, the interviews that we had, and then the city and the county can decide what to do with the money. But that you've got a couple of people out there that want to just divide it up in the tax districts, contrary to what we've done in the past.
Don't they drive our streets?
Well, we also have a request from the college too, so.
Yeah, we have a big request from college that has to be considered. But I just thought, is there any of these plans that you want investigated more? No?
of course, more information is better, but, yeah, I'd say move ahead and
On
take a
what?
look.
Move ahead on
I would say, on each of these items, I'm not, okay, if you want me to go down the list. Streetlight fund, I'm not, anything that has a vote tied to it, I would be in favor. So number 4, I'm inclined to say yes, move towards looking into that. Also, I saw a percent where other utilities are paying 5%, perhaps something in the middle, 4%. But you said that there would be a reaction with PUD for doing that.
Well, their franchise fee looks like a skyrocket going off, I think, you know.
From us or from
No,
other?
from the Design LLC amount of power that they're using, and we get a franchise fee off of it, and it continues to grow.
So they're benefiting from, of course.
They're benefiting and we're benefiting.
All right, so that's a
And
potential.
right now, those funds go into the general fund, so as
You
those,
said it was a 39% increase this year,
I'm not surprised, but
in
that,
1 year.
I'm not surprised that's for the franchise fee collected at 3%.
Yeah.
My point was that those aren't coming in to provide any street maintenance.
Right.
They're supporting the general fund. So that can come around to the $150,000 that's been contributed. Is that the number? You know, I'm starting to stray into Julie's comfort zone a little bit. But it's just that that's where those funds that are increasing are going.
Right.
They're not directly coming in.
So to answer your question, I'm possibly looking at raising that, I don't know, 5%, but it seems like that would be a feasible area. from
Raising
3 to
what
4.
5%?
I would,
PUD.
North Wasco County PUD
PUD?
fee, it's now currently 3. It says other local utilities pay 5. So is that untouchable?
My scenario with the increase on the PUD franchise fee is let's just earmark the increases for street funds.
Yes.
There's no reason to increase a percentage. So,
Oh, you mean what's currently coming in, we just redirect some of that, the funds
like
into the
we
street
did
fund?
with natural gas going into the street fund.
I'm not
its
opposed to
franchise
that.
fee.
I can tell you that that spending the money to put a measure on the ballot to increase the gas tax would be a gross waste of dollars. And I don't think there's probably anybody in this room that would disagree with that assessment.
No.
Okay, then that one's out. I'm not in favor of number 3. Well, let me,
We don't have to make a decision, it's a discussion today. The only question is, do you want to suggest that there be more investigation than what we've got on these options?
I can support that.
I don't know that there needs to be any more investigation. I think there needs to be somebody making a decision. I'm not saying tonight, I'm saying we've got a number of options here, and we need to come up with a stable way to fund street repairs, because we've got a passel of them.
Do you think staff is in a position to come back and make a recommendation at a later
Yes,
point?
Yes.
All right,
Then I'll entertain
that?
that.
Yes.
I'll entertain that.
you disagree, agree?
Well, can we close down a few of these options here so that you have a little bit more direction on which ones we're looking at?
Right, that's what I kept asking.
Well, I was trying to go through, I'd say now that the local 3-cent fuel tax is probably not feasible. Would everyone agree with that? All right, so it looks like number 4 is off the table. I hear all of them will have direct consequences if any of those are raised, it appears. How do you feel?
Options 1 and 2, streetlights and the PUD fees, but the PUD fees, I'm not in favor of increasing the percentage of the franchise fee. So,
Would you like us to, here's what I have from just listening to your conversation tonight. We can look at streetlight funding being removed from the street fund. That would be coming from the general fund. So if we do that, it
I
would have to
can
be
agree
some
with
kind
that.
of a combination that we would come back to you with a recommendation of that offsetting what additional revenues we get from the PUD franchise. We're gonna need to sit down and have a conversation about, what does that dollar need for the street department, so we can figure that out for sure. And then I would also like to bring you back a little bit on the user fee, because I do
Yeah.
think that's a good
User,
option.
user
It's
fee generate what,
very-
about $350,000, was that
Well,
what it
it's
was,
just a
Dave?
very
Somewhere in that,
common way that cities are funding
and is that a workable,
particular
is that a workable
things
number?
like
Would that
right
get
now,
us to where
some
we wanna
cities are using
be
it to fund their
eventually?
police services or public safety.
I mean,
their
would it be
streets, or-
enough?
It's a very common revenue source for cities.
I like that more than,
The user.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
that would be our proposal, we would bring back two or three options.
I'm just trying to come up with something,
Continue to consider.
I agree with that, but I still think that there needs to be public input
picking
and
little
some
pieces here and there
feedback,
is not,
either through
is
town
not the way
halls
to
before any
finance
increases go in place.
anything,
And
I don't personally
absolutely.
think.
We would have a public
Not that
hearing.
I'm good
I know
with
that,
numbers.
but I'd like
Angie knows all
as
those
much
numbers.
public input and notification before we do anything, because it will come back, you know. I want to prevent and have open dialogue and transparency.
I'd really like to have a decision by November, because I might not be here next year.
Okay,
I'd like to,
All
I'd
right.
like to feel like I accomplished something in 4 years.
Sounds like we're done. Adjourn.
And
Angie.
all righty.